God is greater than my failures.
God is greater than my fears.
God is greater than my questions.
God is greater than my career.
God is greater than my wallet.
God is greater than my insecurities.
God is greater than my doubts.
God is greater than my pain.
God is greater than me.
My name is Brandon. If I haven't met you yet, one of the pastors here. We're so glad to have you with us. And I have a question for you as we get started. Can I trust you guys? Yes? Can I trust you guys not to make fun of me too much? No? No? Okay, maybe not. Any former middle school bullies in here? No. Okay, I didn't get a yes, so I'll keep going. I want to tell you about an area of insecurity of mine while I was growing up. I also want to give you permission to laugh because I think it's hilarious. So here's what happened. When I was growing up, this continual thing would happen. I'll set the scene for you where consistent theme of anxiety that developed around taking pictures. So what would happen is I'd get roped into some event where someone wanted to take pictures, and they'd say, "Smile," and I would try to smile, and invariably the person taking the picture would say, "Brandon, smile with your teeth." So I would try to do so, and then they would look at me weird, and eventually they would just give up and take the picture. Anyway, now I couldn't see my teeth, so I had no idea what was happening. All I knew was that my efforts only seemed to disappoint them further, it seemed. I just knew that person after person was obviously disappointed in the way that I smiled. Older me realized what was happening. You see, many people, when they smile, naturally show off their pearly whites. My mouth doesn't do that for some reason. My natural smile leaves my mouth closed for some reason. So I have to try very hard and honestly look a bit clownish to show my teeth when I smile. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't really care about this. Not really. But my wife just so happens to have a lot of sympathy for things like this. She has a real soft spot for things like that. So possibly, in order to take advantage of her sympathy, I came up with a nickname for myself. You guys want to hear it? The boy with the broken smile. I told you could laugh. It's totally fine. Totally fine. I think it may be why she married me, in fact. Maybe why she married me. I share that with you because we're going to be looking at a story where the topic of insecurity comes up today. And while many of you may not have a broken smile, in the right company and spirit of vulnerability, I bet all of us would admit to deep insecurities of one kind or another. I'm excited to show you what God's solution to this universal problem is. So open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 3. We're going to look at a famous story where Moses encounters God at the burning bush. And just as a quick refresher, here's a summary of Moses' life up to this point. Moses was born in Egypt during the enslavement of the Israelite people. In particular, he was born during the period which the Pharaoh had ordered that all newborn male Hebrew children be killed and cast into the Nile River. So not a great start here to his life. But through an elaborate plan by his mother, Moses was placed into a basket in the river, hoping someone would save him and allow him to live. It turns out he was rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh. She had mercy on him, and he was brought up in the splendor of the Egyptian court as her adopted son. So he had a slave to prince story. And as Moses grew into manhood, he occupied this strange position. He was a member of the richest and most powerful family in Egypt, but by identity, he was a Jew. He was very aware of his origin and also the way that his people were treated so terribly. So one day he walked up and he witnessed an Egyptian taskmaster brutally beating his fellow Hebrew slave. He was so enraged at this that he killed the Egyptian. So at this point, he became a fugitive on the loose. He was so afraid of wrath and punishment from the Egyptians that he fled to the desert of Midian, out in the middle of nowhere, where he became a shepherd for a man named Jethro, a priest whose daughter he would later marry. And so when Exodus 3 starts, Moses is herding the flock of sheep through the wilderness. He comes to Mount Horeb, known as the mountain of God, and he sees a strange sight. He sees an angel of the Lord appear to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. The bush is on fire, but it's not being burned up. Naturally, this gets his attention, as it would yours. God speaks to him. He tells him to take off his shoes because he's standing on holy ground. And then we'll pick up the story in verse 7. It says, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them." So God is seeing what Moses had seen, and he's not okay with it either. And now he has a job for Moses. Verse 10, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" So when you think of Moses, you probably think of the highlights you've heard. He's a pretty famous guy. Most non-Christians would know who he is and could tell you a few details about his life maybe. So you may be prone to think that Moses responded to this request by saying, "Well, of course, I am Moses after all. I will live in infamy." But that's not at all what we see here. Moses is not a biblical hero yet. He has written 0 books of the Bible at this point. Charlton Heston has not signed up to play his part yet. That's not where we are. Instead, what we have in this moment is a man in crisis. Moses is a man from one of the most historically oppressed people groups in history. He barely escaped being killed as a baby just because of his race. By great fortune, he rose to the highest possible place, but his righteous indignation cost him all of that. He went from eating in the palace to eating whatever he could find on the road, running for his life. He went from royalty to herding sheep. That's how far he fell. So Moses is a disgraced man. And if you've ever interacted with one of those, you might know the type of things he might be dealing with. On top of that, the act that cost him his life as he knew it also caused his own people to reject him. There's a moment in Exodus 2 after he's killed the Egyptian, but before making a run for it, where he's talking with a fellow Jew who says this to him, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So he's no longer safe with the Egyptians, but he's also no longer welcome with the Jews. He's not only disgraced, he's also alone, other than his newfound desert family and maybe the sheep, I guess. A little bit later, we also find out that Moses has some sort of difficulty with speech. He is not some privileged Ivy Tower, well-educated person who walks into every room like they own it. Even after all those years at the palace, surrounded by every resource imaginable, he still cannot speak clearly or confidently. So this is the man we find looking at the burning bush. So it makes a little more sense why he would respond the way he did. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? There are likely a mixture of insecurities laced throughout his response. Some are just about who he is. Like, I can't speak clearly. Pharaoh will laugh at me just like others have. I don't know if you remember this, but I'm a Jew and we're down here, and they are Egyptians and they are up here. This is not going to go well. Others are not about who he is, but about what he's done. So remember the response from his fellow Israelite. Who made you a prince and judge over us? Are you just going to kill me too? So maybe his question, who am I, is just a replay of what that person said to him. Something he'd internalized while battling his demons late at night out there with the sheep. Moses is very well thinking, God, if you're looking for a morally upright figurehead to lead your people, I'm not the guy. I've got history. I am not meant to be the savior of my people. Moses is disgraced. He's lonely. He feels rejected by people very important to him. He's greatly lacking in confidence. He's insecure. In other words, Moses is us. He's us. And I don't know the particular kinds of insecurity you might deal with. Honestly, as a pastor, I've been exposed to a wide range of insecurities in people. There are many different stripes. Think of someone you don't think is insecure, and chances are they actually deeply are, maybe just not in an area that would feel familiar to you. There are an endless number of expressions, but the core of our insecurity is, what if I don't have what it takes? What if I'm not good enough? I am not blank enough. Just fill in your blank, whatever your real or perceived deficiencies are. What do you think people may laugh or snicker at you behind your back about? Where do you feel like a rookie, where you're keenly aware of your ignorance? Where do you obsessively compare yourself to others? You play their highlight reel over and over in comparison to your blooper reel. Where do you think, is something wrong with me? That gnawing sense that I'm insufficient or lacking, like, why don't I have closer friends or deeper relationships? Am I the problem? What's wrong with me? I've heard insecurity described before as the monologue monster. I think that's a great picture, the internal voice that keeps harping on things. It keeps harping on your past, your failures, your mistakes, your sin struggles, where you think, there's no way God could be pleased with me or use me after what I've done or what's been done to me. My hunch is that we would all be in good company with Moses. We would all have our list. It's highly likely that your view of yourself has been shaped by the people around you, by parents and friends and bullies and spouses. Words have been spoken over you that have now become a mirror for you to view yourself. Now, I bet most of us would respond the same way Moses did. Who am I? Who am I? Look at this weakness I have, this deficiency I have, this embarrassing trait, this thing I've done, this thing people have said about me that I'll never forget. And many times that question isn't directed at the Lord, but rather at anyone we deem worthy of answering it. Who am I? This question often gets silently shouted into every room we walk in. And insecurity is one thing that our culture just has so much sympathy for, right? Like when someone is vulnerable about their insecurities, it's like we all suddenly become Mr. Rogers. It's magic. We all suddenly just swarm them with compassion. We have lots of thoughts to try to offer to help, much like when I call myself the boy with a broken smile, and my wife, she just rushes in to save the day, right? Just rushes in. And a lot of times we rush in, we try to boost self-esteem, we try to help, which there is some good in and often is a very gracious thing to do. So we say, no, your smile isn't broken, it's beautiful, hypothetically. No, you're not a failure, let me tell you all the wonderful things about you. No, you're not bad at that thing you care so much about. Look how much you're learning and growing. Look how much progress you've made. No, you're not worthless. That's just a narrative script from your family of origin. Let me tell you all the ways you enrich my life and the lives of those around you. What do you mean you think that person is prettier than you? Do you want to get on Instagram and trash talk them? Maybe that one's not as helpful. That one went too far. By trying to build up self-esteem, we offer counter-narratives to the monologue monsters inside of each other. And this is often a kind and compassionate thing to do. And to a certain extent, I'm grateful for the times dear friends have done this for me. But I do have one question, though. And that question is, why doesn't it work? Why does it never seem to actually work? Why does it often come up woefully short and not fix the underlying insecurity? It sure does seem like the self can't build self-esteem, as if it's something that just doesn't work. And when others try to build it for you, well, they're just one data point among others. So consider this quote from Psychology Today about the self-esteem movement. It says, the self-esteem movement has done an entire generation a deep disservice. It started with the best of intentions. In 1969, Nathaniel Branden wrote a paper entitled The Psychology of Self-Esteem that suggested that feelings of self-esteem were the key to success in life. Hearing this, many people started to find ways to confer confidence upon our children. This resulted in competitions where everyone gets a trophy and no one actually wins. New games attempted to engage children without any winners or losers. The parents who embraced these efforts did so out of love and with the most noble of intentions. The only problem is that these efforts simply do not work. Self-esteem is not something conferred. It is earned through taking risks and developing skills. When children stretch themselves, they expand their sense of their own capability and then feel confident to take the next challenge. Confidence comes from competence. We do not bestow it as a gift. So as well-intentioned as it is, there's an underbelly to it. And honestly, the follow-up question I would ask that author is, what about when you can't earn it either? Like, what about the kid who only cares about one thing in life, and that's being good at soccer? And that kid isn't good at soccer and never will be. This is the if you believe it, you will achieve it mantra. And while also well-intentioned, it's just not reality, because you can pine all you want to have certain traits or wirings or giftings, and then someone walks in the room who has them in spades, and they don't even care about it. What about the person who comes to you devastated because people think they're mean, and you're like, what? People think what about you? And you lie to try to be compassionate, and you tell them they're not mean. There's some big cracks in this approach, to say the least, and trying to boost self-esteem doesn't solve the deeper problem. It can't. And I would argue here's why. Think back to Moses, the disgraced, lonely, insecure man wandering in the wilderness by himself. He comes up to a mountain, something inherently humbling in itself. He sees a bush that's raging with fire. The flames are dancing, the heat swirling through the air. He hears God himself speak and tell him to take his shoes off. He calls this man with his unique history and unique weaknesses to a very important job. So don't lose sight of all of these things that are happening around Moses. And when it comes down to time to respond, where does his focus go? It goes in. Straight down to, who am I? The mountain, the angel, the ground, the fire, the voice of God, the calling. He is literally surrounded by things meant to draw him out of himself, to draw his attention up and out, but instead it goes down and in. Who am I? What if that's entirely the wrong question? What if it's understandable in such a circumstance, but maybe even borderline inappropriate? Picking up the story from there, you'll notice something fascinating. God doesn't do any of the things we might think he would do. He does not say, oh, Moses, buddy, you're going to do great, and try to build up his self-confidence. He doesn't actually even answer Moses' question at all. So how does God deal with his insecurity? He changes the entire focus. Pick back up in verse 12. He said, but I will be with you. By not answering the question, he just answered every question. I will be with you. That's what you need to know. That's what's important. Whatever else you're occupied with isn't important. I will be with you. It gets better. Pick back up. And this shall be the sign for you that I've sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. He gives them a promise that he's going to do what he says. Not only will you do what I have for you, but you'll actually bring everybody back right here to this mountain where you're standing. Fun fact, he did that, and that's where God gave them the 10 Commandments. Moses has another question, verse 13. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So to summarize, Moses came into this encounter with God and he asked who he was. This is something we all would identify with. In response, God doesn't tell him. He doesn't answer that question. What he does, rather, is give Moses 2 things. He tells him who he is and where he will be. Who he is and where he will be. So the name Yahweh comes from the Hebrew word to be, or I will be. God states his identity as the one who always has been, the one who is, and the one who always will be, the center of being and reality itself. And then secondly, and where he will be. I will be with you, Yahweh says. The power and presence that you sense now will be by your side as you go to make demands of the most powerful man in the world. You guys remember the movie Lion King? Yeah, classic. If you remember, there's a scene where Simba roars. He's backed into a corner, and there are these hyenas around him, and he roars, and the hyenas just start mocking him. They're like, that was it? Do it again. Please, come on. And then little Simba roars again, but this time it's much, much louder because Mufasa showed up and roared alongside him, and the hyenas freak out and scatter. So that's what I will be with you means. It doesn't matter what your roar sounds like. What matters is God's power. This is just such a cool moment we see here because God, having made Moses, gave him the answers he knew he needed, not the one he asked for. And honestly, he does the same for us when we ask our versions of the question. I'd imagine there are some here who, if we were to sit down in the right environment, would admit that life hasn't quite turned out how you'd hoped. Maybe you're not as successful as you thought you'd be. You had all these dreams of what your career would be like, and instead, you have a job you're not especially proud of. And if you're honest, it makes you wonder who you are. You get through life with the help of your coping mechanisms and Netflix, but deep down, that question never really goes away. To you, I hold in front of you a God who knows all of that, who lifts your eyes up, who tells you who he is and where he will be. Some here likely have physical or personality traits that embarrass you, things about your body or personhood or manner of relating that you can't do anything about and occupy a great deal of your thought life. You've tried every trick under the sun, but the gnawing sense that others are always noticing that about you just haunts you. You're so accustomed to these thoughts that you're honestly not sure what life would feel like without them or if freedom is even possible. It might feel a bit like Stockholm Syndrome, where you're so used to your captors that you don't even know if you fancy life without them. I would point your gaze to a burning bush and a booming voice so mesmerizing, it has the power to draw you out of yourself. To a God who tells you who he is and where he will be. Some here may not have been blessed with identities you long for. Husband, wife, mom, dad, etc. You don't know when or if these desires will ever be met. And the thought that they might not gets you in a place that words can't get to. I can't tell you if those titles will ever fall on you, but what I can confidently tell you is that you have a God who says he will be with you no matter what. A God who lifts your eyes up, who tells you who he is and where he will be. Some here likely feel excluded or rejected by people who are important to you, like you're wandering in a desert, unaccepted on some level by those you want it from the most. I lift up to you the God who meets people in lonely places. who has never met a desert he can't hike or a mountain he can't climb, a God whose voice makes loneliness flee. Some are disgraced by what you've done. You hear that God has a purpose and a plan, that he wants to use you to spread his kingdom, and you think, there's no way that applies to me. Not after the things I've done, not with my addiction, my history, my baggage. I hold before you a God who is much more concerned about who he is than who you are and what you've done. Who already knows, even better than you, the depths of your motives and actions. A God who tells you who he is and where he will be. So Moses did not get the answer to the question that he asked, and that was grace. Because what he got instead was a vision of God big enough to make his question inconsequential. And that's what we really need, you guys. We don't need self-esteem, at least not ultimately. We don't need whatever band-aids our culture preaches. We need something powerful enough, captivating enough, that we don't even think about that question anymore. What God offered Moses is a solution to your insecurity problem and a totally new vision for life that will make that question fade in comparison. A while back, I watched this very unusual show on Hulu called In and of Itself. Anyone seen this by chance? No? It's kind of obscure, but In and of Itself, it's a one-man play, part magic act, part storytelling deal. It's very unique. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's not Christian in its messaging at all, but for secular art, it's quite brilliant and very moving. The play/magic act was performed in New York City 522 times. And each time it was performed, it started by having the audience walk in this lobby and up to a massive wall with hundreds of different cards on there that said, I am blank. So it had all these different identities on these cards, hundreds of them. And each audience member chose a card and then went to sit in their seat and then proceeded to hear this act that was all about identity, all about the question, who are you? There were famous people in the audience. So Bill Gates, for example, was there. David Blaine was there. Other people I don't remember. And I don't want to ruin too much of it for you, but I'll just say the creator pulled off some very powerful moments where he meaningfully spoke to individual audience members about how they saw themselves and who they really are. And the climax of the show involves the creator magically somehow knowing and speaking over individual audience members their self-chosen identities, many times with them just weeping. Just bawling. And I won't lie, I may have teared up a time or three watching it. It's quite good, quite well done. But I also saw it through a heartbreaking lens because here were all of these insanely wealthy and successful people whose need for an identity to fully capture who they are is just crippling. It's just crippling them. They were so insanely debilitated by the question, who am I? They were crying at a magic show. And outside of the God we're talking about today, what other option do they have? Who am I can become a crippling question that hangs over our heads at all times. And its various forms can consume the majority of your thought life and interactions. It can lead you to weird places if those places offer an emotionally compelling answer. And the thing about insecurity is we believe a big lie about it. We believe it only hurts us. Like, sure, it makes my life really difficult, and I see how it hurts and consumes me, but we tend to think that's as far as it goes. But when any family or life group or church is made up of people walking around obsessively asking questions about themselves, it just sucks the vibrancy and health out of the air. It drains the joy out of you. It also prevents your attention from being on God and being a blessing to others. It's just a more sympathetic version of narcissist staring at his own reflection. And it turns our community into a more sanctified version of that New York City theater. Think about it from the story of Moses. At the moment where this disgraced, lonely, insecure man is meeting with God on the mountain, think of all the cries of his people. Think of the suffering yet to be relieved, the rescue yet to be enacted, the majesty and power of God yet to be put on display. What happened in this story is that God turned Moses from a who am I person into a God is with me person. He left the desert and in time was so filled with God's power that he boldly stood up to the enemies of God. And what God offers us is that exact same transformation. He offers us the opportunity to lose interest in the question, who am I? Instead, he offers us the supernatural ability to become a God is with me person. My friend Ant, who pastors our two-notch church, shared something really helpful recently. He said that anytime he has a conversation with someone that's saying they're not sure whether they want to go to life group anymore, for whatever reason, they're tired, they're too busy, they don't feel like they belong, whatever, he just stops them and asks them something along these lines. Like, hey, I'm curious, when you think about yourself participating in life group, do you see yourself as an agent of God with the supernatural power of the Holy Spirit with you, such that you think, there's no telling how God might use me tonight? And closing in on 100% of the time, the person says, no, I don't see myself like that. And that's a very clear distinction of the kind of change I'm talking about. On one hand, there's a who am I person, a what do I want person. And on the other hand, there is a God is with me person. A who am I person walks into a room and can hardly truly see the other people in the room because their focus is so bent on themselves. They just carry around the narcissist mirror at all times, and every interaction is really about how they look in the mirror. But a God is with me person walks without any mirror to speak of into any room like the God who defied the laws of science at the burning bush is inside them. And that means there's no telling what might happen. There's no telling who he might free with your feeble mouth. No telling what chains of slavery he might break. Can you imagine if that's the way we approached our jobs that haven't given us the identities we've hoped for? Like instead of getting ready to mope around the office again, we woke up in the morning and prayed, all right, God, who are you trying to free up today? Who are you trying to speak to today? Because I'm walking into that cubicle with some gospel good news and some power that doesn't come from me. Then you spend your day praying for the unseen pharaohs oppressing the people who work around you. And you find yourself so preoccupied that you don't even think too much about the questions that used to dominate your thought life. What if you get off work a little late on Wednesday and the old thoughts creep up, and I'm tired, and besides, do they really even care if I'm at life group tonight? Would they even miss me at all? And instead, those thoughts get crowded out because you remember, Sarah, she's been struggling mightily, and I've been praying for her all week. And now that I'm turning into a God is with me person, I think I might have a word for her that might just be what God uses to break the spirit of Egypt she's been walking in. What if you made peace with the relationships or circles where, rightly or wrongly, you tend to feel excluded or rejected? And instead, you walked into those spaces with your eyes peeled for anyone else who might feel excluded or rejected. And you view yourself as being sent by the God on the mountain to tell them who he is and where he's promised he'll be. What if for those of you who are insecure about physical or personality traits and dominated by thoughts about them, what if you come before God and say, Yahweh, I've been living in mental Egypt for so long, and their demands are ruthless there. I need you to free me from being a who am I person because I can't do it. I need you to break these chains with a powerful vision of yourself. And then you're freed up by the powerful Spirit of the living God to walk in any room, no longer looking for someone who can answer that question for you, but looking for other prisoners to be freed. For those of you who are shy or don't know as much as you'd like, who are timid or not good with words, who are nervous about telling others about Jesus and your faith in him, what if you traded in the smallness of the question, who am I to do this, for the booming power of the God who promised he will be with you? What if you, in faith, opened your feeble mouth to hear the inexplicable roar of God's Spirit come out of you to accomplish what you never could in a million years? And I'll be honest with you, I've been a who am I person way too often. There's no joy or life or purpose there. There are no sufficient answers to the question. It is a trap. I want to instead be a God is with me person, and I want that for you too. I want to be captivated by the God on the mountain, to take my shoes off, to see the mesmerizing fire, to be drawn out of myself, to hear God tell me who he is and where he will be, and know that is entirely enough. And ultimately, I want my attention pointed to a sight even more powerful than what Moses saw. The one and only eternal Son of God hanging on a cross and walking out of his tomb to free us from a slavery far more powerful than Egypt. So that I walk into any and every room, freed from the addiction of self-focus, instead thinking, there's no telling what God might do here. Please pray with me.